It's April, and even though it's still springtime and early, we have a lot more happening in the garden than we did last month. So exciting, there's actually plants going in the garden. I have got here a portion of our broccoli. So we've got the broccoli starts in, and they're still small and pretty tender. I'm in gardening zone 7, which only really matters for the perennial plants. But our last average frost date is usually April 30th or the 1st of May, just depending on if we have clear nights or cloudy, rainy nights. Rainy and cloudy, as we have right now, those typically are warmer nights. But if we get some really clear nights, we can still get some hard frost, usually over by the very last part of April. So in reference, this is about I'm actually filming this the day before April starts, so I can get it edited and out to you guys timely wise in April. But these are just my little tiny seedlings. So these are good and down into the 30s. But if we're gonna have a night where it's down getting into the 20s, then I do use these as a frost protection. I've got some cut milk jugs that I put upside down over them just to make sure that they don't get damaged while they're still tender. Once the broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and those are more mature, then they're gonna be a little bit more hardy and can survive some of those cooler temps. But they're very happy to be in the ground and getting growing. We also have got our cold frames in. So I have got here, I've got some cabbages that we've got going in the cold frames. And then once we get warmer as April moves on, I'll be able to pop these lids off, but this is just keeping them protected. And I did the cabbage in here versus the broccoli, just because my cabbage tends to get a little bit more eaten by both the slugs. I don't really have any cabbage moths out yet, it's a little bit too early, but this is just gonna help aid them and give them a little bit more protection. And then we've got another cold frame going over here, a different variety that I've made. This is actually part of a very special project that I can't tell you about right now, except it will be coming your way this fall. But this, I've got spinach starts in, as well as I had just, they popped. Here we go. I've got little baby, this is spinach seed. So I did some direct sowing of spinach seed, and then I had some starts to put in. So you can see here, so I can start harvesting off of these really soon, and then these will come in and be growing. So I'm doing succession planting of spinach actually in the cold frame, both with starts and with direct sowing. And so, yay, they have germinated. I hadn't actually realized I hadn't been out here to peek and see that they came through the surface yet. So very exciting times. I don't know if anybody else gets as excited when you see your seeds popping and germinating, but I certainly call it as something to celebrate. So we'll be getting ready to actually prep the rest of these beds. I've got the clover I'm allowing to grow. So if you're looking and you're seeing all of this green, the majority of that is clover, and the reason that I'm letting this grow is because clover actually helps to put nitrogen back into the soil. So I'm kind of using it as a cover crop, but I'm also using it as a way to get nutrients back into the soil, especially for brassicas. They use a lot of nitrogen, and so we're leaving this in here until I need more planting space, which is coming soon, and then we'll just go and do a chop and drop, where we'll chop it off and we'll let the leaves drop, they'll break down and feed the soil, and then we'll get more things planted. And I need to put in some more mulching on the walkways here. But we've got in the high tunnel, so you're probably noticing a theme here. Most of what I'm growing now is all cold weather crops, but I'm also still having to put the majority of them under some type of protection because we're still a little bit cold for all of these, especially if we hit those frosts. But I've got my lettuce in, or at least the first 2 rows of lettuce. And then here in the high tunnel, I've actually opened up both ends, which are our doorways, to acclimate my perennials that I was overwintering in here for the medicinal garden. So you can see these medicinal roses, because it's warmer in here, they've already started to leaf out. So I'm slowly getting them hardened off to outdoor conditions, but still keeping them somewhat protected. It'll be a few more weeks though before I plant these out in their final spot in the medicinal teaching herb garden. Just because if we get those really hard overnight frosts, I don't want it to actually damage any of this new growth. And then I've got the lavender. I don't know if you can see, but there's actually new growth here on these lavender. So kind of the same thing. I'm going to give them a week or two here where they're just a little bit protected and acclimated, and then they'll be going in the medicinal herb garden. Hey, could you please get out? Out. Hey, out please. Out please. Out. No. No. Go lay down. Go lay down. Go lay down. Go take care of the chickens or the cow. Go lay down. Come on. Oh yes, here, let's do that. Give me your stick. Okay, no, you go take it and keep it. Great. So here on our lavender plants, you can actually see little bits of new green growth coming on these guys, which is exciting because I have never overwintered brand new lavender starts actually. I've always just had mine planted in the ground in spring, and they're well acclimated and ready to go through the winter months by the time we hit fall. But these guys, I ordered in new starts and they came right as the frosts were hitting in winter, and so I couldn't put them out. So super exciting every time you see new growth, but especially on plants that you weren't sure if we're gonna make it or not. So these guys will all be going in the garden very soon in their final spots. They just need a couple of more weeks, kind of like acclimating and hardening off before they go in. So next we have got all of the onions that are going in. So I actually have onions already planted in the spot, but I have not gotten my final. These are the ones that I seed started. So you guys saw that video, or you can go and watch that video on how to seed start your onions. So here they will be going in this week along this side. So this will be the full onion patch. And then I've already got planted, I just didn't get to all of them. I've got some more of the onion sets that I started from seed here. And then I direct sowed these ones that are under the cold tunnel, which I've got the ends open, again, letting them get acclimated, and then I'll be pulling this high tunnel off of them probably next week, and then they'll just be fine all the way through until harvest. So these, what's been really fun though is these guys are actually starting to bulb just a little bit on the bottom. Like you can actually see the development of where the onion is starting to develop. So it's going to be really exciting to see what the final harvest size is of these guys that I started much, much earlier indoors versus the ones that were direct sown, and if they end up catching each other or if these guys end up being much larger than those ones. So I don't know about you, but I love a good experiment in the garden and just seeing where I can push boundaries and what I can do. So I'm actually just going to leave these guys here because I need to come back out and actually get them planted and in the ground. Now, you may see over there where I have got green netting, fencing laying on the ground on top of the garlic. The reason for that is until just last week, we were letting the chickens free range for the springtime, and they were trying to dig any and everything up. So we put that down. It worked very well, but we finally, when I actually got the broccoli in the ground until we get the fencing back up around the garden, the girls had to go back in the chicken tractor, and they're not allowed to free range because they were a little bit too destructive. They were just as excited as I was on seeing all of the new green growth and just wanted to help themselves. They weren't being nice about leaving some for anybody else. So they are pinned back up in the tractors until we can get the fencing up around the garden. But I just haven't gotten those pulled up and off yet. Now, I know probably for a lot of people, including ourselves, not knowing what's gonna be happening with increasing gas costs, rising fuel prices, which is going to affect groceries, and different reports that you see on the news or listen to the news. I think something on everybody's mind is there going to be food shortages? And none of us know the future, and I am definitely not someone who likes to operate from a place of fear, but if you were ever thinking of growing a garden and or expanding what you were growing in the garden, this is an excellent year to do so, especially when we're talking about perennials. So I wanted to share with you guys, this is our perennial patch, and here I've got some rhubarb, which looks like my dog decided to help dig a little hole there. The rhubarb is coming up, but what I wanted to show you is the blueberry plants. So here I had a blueberry plant that got taken out by mummyberry. So if you have blueberries or you're wondering about mummyberry, I've got some videos on that. We'll link them below in the video in the description if you want to go and check those out. But I had bought a small blueberry plant last year to replace it because smaller bare root plants are cheaper options. If you're going to purchase them, bare root is always cheaper. And bare root just means that it comes not planted in a pot with dirt. It's actually gets shipped as bare root. Or if you go to nurseries, they just have it sitting in really loose soil, but you can literally just pull it up and look at the rootstock. That's bare root. Bare root, though, typically, once you hit the warmer growing months and the plants come out of dormancy, then they need to plant them either in the ground so that they can actually grow, or they have to pot them during the summer months and when the plant's actually beginning to flower out. So the reason I share that with you is because if you are still, depending on your climate at the time you watch this, and things are still in dormancy, check with your local nurseries because bare root plants are going to be less expensive. But I decided, when thinking about the price of blueberries, for example, with this one, and what they're going to be this summer, possibly, and just with the increasing costs, I mean, even in a year where you don't have weird things happening, which, have we had years like that lately? It feels like we've had weird things happening for the past 3 years, no matter what. But even looking back historically, okay, historically may be too strong of a word. Let's say 10 years ago. Blueberries probably don't cost the same as they did 10 years ago. And 10 years from now, they're not going to cost what they do now. They're likely going to be more expensive. When you look at perennials, that's a good way to view it, because if you get a perennial that you know how to take care of right, it will provide fruit for years and years. These blueberry plants behind me, those are going on almost 15 years now, and they are producing fruit every single year. So that was a super good investment, and I'm like, man, I wish I had put a few more in back then. So this is a 7-gallon blueberry plant. It's in a 7-gallon pot that I just bought. Now, it's not a bare root, but the reason I decided not to do bare root on this guy is I actually want to get fruit off of this year. And when it comes to perennials, when they're 1 or 2 years old, you don't actually want to let them go to fruit. Hey, stay out of the rhubarb, please. Go on. He just wants to be in everybody's business today. But the reason you want to take the blossoms off when they're only 1 or 2 years old is you need a really good root system developed, and you want the energy going to the root system, not towards producing fruit when it's really young, because it's going to pick one or the other. And then that way, boy, I tied a really good knot in this. So I was trying to get this down to just illustrate better for you. So you can see this is potted. I paid more for it. However, this plant is a 3-year-old plant, which means that I can plant this in the ground and I will get fruit off of it this year. If you can buy locally where you can actually inspect the plant, especially with blueberries, I can actually see all of these large blossoms here on the ends. These are all, the leaves are the little tiny ones, nubs. These larger ones here, these are fruit blossoms. So I can tell that this plant is going to produce a lot of fruit versus other ones at the nursery that maybe only had, you know, a few of the fruit blossoms on the branches. They were more leaf or just branches that weren't fruit bearing. So if you can go in person, I know that I'm going to get a large harvest off of this the first year because I bought a 3-year-old plant. So something to consider. Do you want fruit now? You will pay a little bit more for it, but in the 3 years, if I had bought a younger plant and maybe saved myself $10 or $15 at the time of purchasing it, this year alone, this plant will actually pay probably almost for itself in the fruit, and definitely when you aggregate those years out. So got this in, and then this is a really good time of year if you had perennials, especially your fruits like elderberries or even your fruit trees, and they blossomed out last year, but they didn't produce fruit. The reason for that is because most likely if they're blossoming but they don't produce fruit, it's because they don't have a pollinator. They are a cross-pollinating variety, and for whatever reason, they're not getting pollinated. Usually it just means that you don't have another variety of the same species nearby. So for example, This is an elderberry plant that I put in 3 years ago, and you can see like it's getting really big and large and robust. And it blossoms. I get tons of elderberry blossoms on this. However, the pollinator that I had, because I knew that it required a cross-pollinator, it has never grown as well. I bought them at the exact same time from the same nursery, but it's never done well. And so I actually moved it because it always seems like it's burnt in the summertime, like its leaves look burnt. And so I moved it over here. We are still massively under construction. But I moved it over here so that it wasn't getting the really super hot afternoon sun, but it was still getting at least 6 hours of sun a day. But look at the size difference. These were planted at the exact same time and ordered at the same time. They were the same age when I got them. And this one has just never done very well, and it's never produced blossoms, which means I've got one elderberry that would be producing a mass amount of elderberries if its blossoms could get pollinated. So I decided I was not waiting for this anymore. I'm not gambling to see if this one will actually create blossoms this year. So I bought an elderberry, and I went and bought them in person at a local nursery. For me, one of our local nurseries where I got these was Christensen. So if you live in Skagit County in Washington State, highly recommend checking them out. But here's what I want to show you. I actually went in and selected by looking to see if this was having any little flower blossoms already on it. There was 5 of the Sambucus nigra, which is what I needed because Sambucus nigra is the variety that I have, and I needed to make sure that it was obviously not Sambucus canadensis. The Sambucus canadensis doesn't cross-pollinate always to the Sambucus nigra, so I wanted to make sure that they're exact same variety. At least that's my understanding. So you can see here, those are little baby flower blossom starts, which will then become the berries. So I know that this one is going to produce blossoms this year. And even if I didn't decide to let these blossoms become berries on this one, which I will because it's potted and it's it has a decent root system on it, I'm not worried about that. This one will actually pollinate my other plant. So I should have elderberries for the first time on my own property this year. But that's something that you want to keep in mind. So if you're going to buy a pollinator and you want it to pollinate that year, look for the blossoms, for them already forming, and make sure those are the plants that you grab. Now this, you know how like there's some ladies, the ladies who are watching will know where I'm going with this. There's some ladies that have like, they just can't help themselves. They buy new shoes all the time. I'm the opposite. I have a plant problem. I like really hardly can go to town or past a nursery or walk into a nursery or garden department without bringing something home. I really wasn't planning on putting any more fruit trees in this year because we actually have a lot of fruit trees here, and there's lots of videos you can watch on how to plant them the proper way, knowing if you should do summer pruning or winter pruning, all types of things. But I don't have a pear tree. And I was at the nursery and I'm like, you know, how much are pears? Pears, one of the things that we're not growing ourselves on the homestead. And somehow it jumped into my cart. Like it had legs and it jumped into the cart. So we now have a pear tree. But what the real purpose of me sharing this is one, so you know that you're not alone. If you also have plants that just magically jump in and make it home with you, you're not alone. But with the pear tree, especially if you are shorter on space, which you wouldn't think, we actually have acreages here, but I am getting it filled up with lots of plants. And pears require a pollinator. And I really wasn't sure if I had the space and the time where I wanted to put more than one pear tree. So I got one of these, which is like a fruit cocktail tree, basically. But they have grafted onto the rootstock. There's actually 5 different pear varieties, all on the same rootstock. And the nice thing about that, I have an apple tree, and it's one of my best producing apple trees, and it's like almost 15 years old, is they have selected these different varieties to graft them on. One, that they will actually be pollinating varieties, so they will pollinate, but also that they're bloom time. So something to consider with cross-pollination varieties, especially with fruit trees, is you've got early bloom, mid bloom, and late season bloom. So you obviously want to make sure that you're picking 2 varieties that have early bloom times versus an early bloom and a late bloom, because if you do early and late bloom, they're going to be blooming at opposite times of one another without very much overlap, and so they're not going to be able to pollinate. So this is nice because it's kind of like a done for you version and allows you to only have one tree, but it will pollinate all of it. And, you know, obviously the branches are close together. So you have really high likelihood that your bees and insects and stuff are going to pollinate for you. So this, I now have a pear tree. What was also nice is asking them, like, how old is your rootstock, and being able to actually talk to them. I do order online, and there's some great online nurseries, but there's nothing like being able to actually be in person and picking out the stock yourself. One tip I will give you, would you go away? Thank you. Not you, my dog. He's feeling very needy today with wanting to be attention as we are filming. But look at the rootstock. So when it's bare root, one, it's cheaper, but two, you want to look at a tree, pay attention to the rootstock. If it has a little tiny amount of roots on it, even if it has a lot of large branches, you don't want that one. You want one that has a large root system on it, because that's going to be a tree that once it's in the ground, it's going to be able to put all of that energy in and be very robust, be healthier, and provide you with a larger harvest for the years to come. So great time of year to get bare root trees still for most areas, and evaluate what you really need to put in order to make sure that you get food this year. Now, another thing that we're thinking of this year, and you also want to be thinking about this time of year, even though it feels really early, is you're preserving. So thinking about what you're growing, how you're going to be preserving it, what you're going to be putting up, and making your plans accordingly, because right now, this all feels relatively pretty small and easy. You know, you look at this, it doesn't feel overwhelming. There are cute little baby starts going in. Within a couple of months, if they're going to be large, the full garden will be put in. We will start to have weeds coming, and it could get very overwhelming unless you've got your plan in place now. So speaking of, let's go in the house and I will show you a little bit more of what I'm talking about. So here I have got my tomatoes and peppers and quite a few of the herbs. We've got basil, summer savory, cilantro, cumin, and all of these starting here. And I actually am starting these guys in the house because I don't want to heat the outside shed. And these are warm weather crops, so they definitely need to be kept above 55 degrees Fahrenheit. But for germination, they actually need to be in a room, ideally that's at least 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not using heat mats, so I had them seed starting right by the fire. Now I've got to move just a little bit away from the fire after they've started to sprout, and we've got them under the grow light. But this is definitely where I am thinking about preserving, and how much do I need of the tomatoes and the peppers and all of these different things to meet our preserving needs. And I'm also thinking about that when we're planting. So if you are still seed starting, or you're getting starts, or you're direct sowing, and you want to try to grow close to a year's worth of food, or you're wondering, like, how many plants do I actually need of these per person for my family, then my book, The Family Garden Plan, has all of that information. But I also offer the charts that help you figure that out and tell you for free. So we'll have a link. You can go and grab those charts and worksheets for free and get going, so that you make sure that you are growing enough to feed your family. The next part of that, though, is growing enough so that you have extra to preserve and also eat fresh off of. And so I'm really excited because I am working on a new preserving book. I know some of you guys have heard I was talking about this inside of the Pioneering Today Academy, my membership, and also with Carolyn from Homesteading Family. We were talking about this, but a new preserving book is going to be coming your way. And what I'm doing is, when we get into harvest season and you've got all these different crops coming on, I wanted a book that had charts where I could go alphabetical order and just go straight to tomatoes, for example. What are all of the safe ways that I can preserve tomatoes at home? And then I want the tutorials, and I want the recipes, and I want a chart that says if you have, 10 pounds of tomatoes, then you can make X amount jars of sauce and or salsa, or that type of stuff, where all the information is just at my fingertips. I know it's from trusted, tested sources, and I'm able to get through my preserving really quickly when time is of the essence. So I will be having more information as we actually get the publication date for that, and a title, because I don't even have a title yet, but it's going to cover all the ways of preserving. It's not just canning. So really, really super excited about that, and know that is coming your way. But you first need to be able to plan which plants you're putting in and how many. So go grab that resource now. Then the other thing that we are doing in April is actually pretty a busy month, and that is the last of my seed starting. So I am going to be seed starting the last of some of my medicinal herbs, as well as the flowers for the cut flower and medicinal herb garden. So I've got just a couple of these out here. I need to pull some more, and I'm going to be getting these done. For a lot of these, it's 4 weeks before your last average frost date. So that's right here at the timing for me, getting these in and going. And then when I am back here for our next gardening month, you'll be seeing what all of that looks like now and watching that progression. So you can go and grab those charts, and you can also watch the videos if you're still seed starting to make sure that you are not missing any of the crucial steps.